The magic of Zoom. Hello, everybody. For those of you who are just joining us, my name is Haley from ProWritingAid, and I am joined today by Janet and Demetrius of World Anvil. For those of you who are not familiar, World Anvil is an amazing set of world building tools. I've seen a lot of folks in the chat asking for map makers, asking for world building tools. So you're going to love this session. We're going to talk today all about tips for world building, and we have a session tomorrow that's going to be all about the World's Anvil software itself. But for right now, I'm just going to turn it over to Janet and Demetrius to talk about the practical aspects of crafting a science fiction world.
Amazing. Thank you so very much. Can we share screen?
Yes, you should be able to.
Let's see.
There you go.
Here we go. So first of all, welcome everybody. Thank you so very much for being here today with us. Today we'll be talking about world building in science fiction.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. So as you very probably, you don't know already, my name is Demetrius and this is Janet. Janet, want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Janet. As it says there, I'm the CEO of World Anvil. I do a lot for World Anvil because World Anvil used to be just me and Demetrius. We started it together, which means he did the technical stuff and I do everything else. But apart from that, in my copious free time, I'm a published RPG writer, and I'm also a published fiction writer, fantasy and sci-fi writer. So that's sort of who I am and what I do.
So I'm Demetrius, I'm the CTO of World Anvil, as in I was the code monkey that started World Anvil about 5 years ago. In fact, we are having our birthday within the next 30 days. Yeah. October, yeah, exactly. I'm a developer, I'm a storyteller, I'm a psychologist. I have been a world builder since the age of 5, which actually means 35 years now, and a natural born pirate because I have one eye and everybody actually recognizes me as such. And an important note that you should know is that I'm not a writer. Although myself and Janet are currently actually co-writing a campaign setting, which is a science fiction campaign setting, I'm not a writer. I will be approaching this talk from the point of a world builder and somebody who is a storyteller, which actually means that he've actually created a lot of worlds and played through them. The reason I'm saying this is because the major differentiation between writing for science fiction as a writer and as a storyteller is that as a storyteller, I had the opportunity to do a lot of testing that was very quickly, quick-fired, and actually have a lot of failure and success events actually one after the other very, very quickly. And that is why it will be approached the way it will be approached. If you have any questions about that, do let me know during the talk.
And we'll just pop the chat up.
Oh yeah, that's a good question.
Lovely people are saying.
Good?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. So can I?
Absolutely, please.
Thank you. So, as you know by now, we are actually presenting World Anvil. World Anvil is a world building tool that we created in 2017. As I said before, it's actually 5 years now. We started, just me and Janet. The whole point behind World Anvil was to create a place for me to keep my world building notes, but even more importantly, it was for Janet to write her first book. Because she used to have a Google document that kept on failing.
The cursed Google document,
yes.
101 pages long, reiterative, did not work, and eventually crashed, eating half of my world building. So World Anvil was the solution to that. And then it also became a novel writing software that is integrated into the world building side as well.
Yes, but the point is that now World Anvil, after 5 years, it is 2 million world builders into its roster, and we have thousands upon thousands of new worlds created every day, and a massive community that you can join and actually, talk about anything you need to know.
If you want to.
As the people who have been here in previous chats, we have been ProWritingAid, you will know we have actually created other seminars that you have attended, which are about world building fantasy or world building in general. I didn't want to focus the world on actually the agile world building methodology, which is currently what we're using, but I wanted to give you now a very short and very quick fire round of the basis of world building and some tips before we go into our main subject, just to give you a little bit of point of how you should be using the things that we'll be talking about during this seminar.
Yeah, so these are like the golden rules of world building in general, right?
Exactly. So first of all, create a document for your world. This can be considered, for example, your world building Bible or setting or however you want to call it, but make sure that everything stays in one place. There is nothing worse than having a wall or essentially multiple nodes that you might lose a notebook and then you lose part of your world and you will never regain. And also you lose all the connections and the reasoning behind things that happened. So make sure that whatever you're using, it's on the same place always. And it should be a place that can store both your text, your images, your ideas, your drafts, your scraps, everything should be in one place. Write less than you need, that you think you need. That's actually a very controversial thing because you talk to writers, you're not very good at that. And that's why I put it in there. When it comes to world building, it's not about actually writing prose. When it comes to world building, it's about refining and distilling your thoughts into as less words as possible. And that is important because when it comes to refer to things, the last thing you want is to have a massive document. You cannot really find out what the hell were you looking for. And that is something we've seen so many times in the last 5 years, and we had to explain 1,000 times. But the simple answer is you don't need to write a whole paragraph about the eyes of your character. You just need to say they are blue or they're hazel and they have flickers of gold in them. And that is enough for you to be able to write anything you want from there. Yeah. Then write in lists or short paragraphs, not in prose. We just kind of touched on that, but lists are much easier to scan, especially when you're searching for something specific. So make sure that you do not extend too much, especially if the document that you're writing is specifically for you. I will not go into the details of how well done can actually be used for presenting your world as well. But when it comes to writing for yourself, lists are easy.
Yeah. So what I always recommend on this, a lot of writers think in prose. I am a writer that thinks in prose. So the way that I will often approach this is I will write out a paragraph in prose, and then I'll break down the salient points into bullet points. So I will keep that quote about the location or about the character or whatever it is, but I'll also have the key details in bullet points, because future me is just going to want to pass that data. Future me does not want to read the quote, but the quote is what gets me there. So that is always my recommendation to writers. If you think better in prose, then use the prose, use the quotation, and then put it into bullet points. So future you will be happy and will save time and will get back to your draft.
Done? Yeah. Good. Excellent. Next thing, keep your notes safe. And by that, I mean, do not please keep only a single copy of whatever you're creating. Unless you're using a software or any piece of system that automatically backs up everything that you do, keep and make sure that this thing is not just on your computer. You do not want to break your computer and suddenly lose everything. And that goes back to what you say, create a core document, keep them together, but keep them in multiple copies and make sure that you update them, if not automatically, quite often. Nobody wants to lose their notes. It's going to be horrible. Keep your notes tagged and easily searchable. I'm putting it later on as well in the talk, but there is nothing more important than actually understanding that a big document that is not easily searchable and you don't understand the connections between the little nodes of it is going to be unusable and useless. We had too many people that came to us and say, I do world building, but at the end of the day, I start writing other things and I can never actually come back and I change things and I don't know what's actually happened. This is because they were writing prose and they couldn't find where the change is made. Yes, your world building will be changed during the process of your manuscript. I mean, your writers, you should change in your world building during the process of your manuscript. But if you have actually tagged it correctly, it should be easy. And that can be, for example, tagged by location, tagged by the name of your character, tagged by the major or minor plot. All those tags will help you actually find something, edit it, change it, and make sure that you stay in parity, especially if this is just the first book of many.
Yeah, absolutely.
World build for yourself first. That goes back to the lists and short paragraphs. People in the community, at least from what we have seen, tend to write because they think in world building, because they think that there will be something that will be actually presented. You don't need to edit your world building. You don't need to actually write long paragraphs. You don't need to actually explain with beautiful detail. What you do need is the facts. Okay. So when you're writing, your question should always be, if I see this 3 months from now, will it make sense to me? If the answer is no, start editing down. As simple as that. Or start writing up the things that you normally don't need to know about because, in the book it doesn't really matter, but in world building is paramount. Finally, set a session goal and a timer. World building can be a massive black hole, especially for science fiction.
Rabbit hole.
Yes. A rabbit hole. So a black hole because there a science fiction version of a rabbit hole. So make sure, because at the end of the day, your goal is always to write your book, your story, your setting, whatever this might be. that when you are world building, you set a timer. It's okay to have a timer if it's every day, but make sure that you say, I will be spending 20 minutes on that, or I will be researching for 10 minutes, possible warp drive, whatever this might be, for the next 10 minutes. And then I will stop because I have enough information to write down on my world building, and then I will leave them and continue to do my writing. And finally, because it cannot fit 2 talks in one, check out the Agile World Building Method videos we have actually on our website. And I'm pretty sure PWA might actually have back sessions as well, because that will give you a bit more understanding of how all of these work and what actually can be the next steps.
Yeah.
I'm leaving to that right now. We can talk a little bit about later. If you have any questions about everything, let me know. Everything that we said already.
I will just mention there's a bunch of people asking for World Anvil tips. We will be doing a World Anvil walkthrough tomorrow, and we're happy to answer questions. But this is more about science fiction world building in general.
Absolutely. Yes. And tomorrow I will be answering any questions you might have about World Anvil.
All the World Anvil questions.
Exactly. We're going to be doing necessarily a bit show and tell, and then actually to ask questions, and we'll be then focusing it again from the science fiction side.
Yeah.
But you can have questions answered for anything you want. So where do you start world building for science fiction? Big question, important question. Where you start world building is probably the first question we're always being asked, and pretty much the bane of our existence, because you know what, world building is not so easy because everybody is doing it a bit differently. What I'm going to give you right now is some basic thoughts and ideas and a distillation of experience we had for several years now of what we find out from people in the community, from our personal experiences and our personal projects. Feel the meta. So the meta, as Janet very acutely said before when we're discussing it again, is the DNA of your world. It is not your world Bible, but it is the answers to about 15 to 16 questions that we can actually find in World Anvil. I don't want to go through the questions. It's part of the previous talks we had. You go to World Anvil, this is for free. You can just go to the meta. You can find all of them. And there is a list of them. It's very simple. Fill them because this is the DNA of your world. This is the document that no matter what changes you made, no matter what the world might develop to become, and no matter what your story is, will always guide you. This is kind of place you go back if you are lost and you don't know what you're supposed to be doing, or you don't know what actually where the world should look like you're going to a new planet and say, okay, cool, I want to continue my story, but I don't understand how I should bring the feeling of my world to this place. The answer should be in the meta. So fill the meta as we discussed before with paragraphs, small short paragraphs and small lists of items, because this is the point that everything will start from. The trick is that the keywords you're going to be used there are going to be effectively the topics that will be expanding to the next slides. In effect, and like an example, if the question in the meta is describe the people that used to live in your world, and you say there used to be 3 major empires called X, Y, or Z, every X, Y, and Z empire will become an important organization that will affect or have affected already the history of your world. Absolutely. As an example, okay? And as we talk about history, let's talk about history. One of the first things that you should always be extremely focused on when it comes to science fiction, even more than fantasy, is that the future you're about to experience and you're about to explore is a derivative of the history of your world as it happened already. So in science fiction, most of the key points, we have actually a point of divergence. The point of divergence might be, for example, during the 1960s, nuclear power was very prevalent, but the people decided to actually go even further into it. So things that normally would have been done by using gasoline, for example, happen with atomic power. That is the premise of Atom Punk, for example, as a science fiction setting.
Fallout is an example of that,
Fallout,
if you're familiar with the Fallout universe.
Yes, actually Fallout goes even further because it takes an Atom Punk universe and goes into retrofuturism, and from there it goes into post-apocalyptic retro Atom Punk futurism.
That is a beautiful genre bundle.
Yes,
but
exactly.
Yes, that is an example of retrofuturism.
Exactly. Then we have actually a progression trajectory. So effectively, we might say, you know what? We are today at 2022. How did we go from 2022 to 2277, which is the beginning of my setting? What is the story that if I start today will reach to become the story of my current date into 2277? for example. And of course, we have second world histories, which are the most difficult to do, because when it comes to second world history, we start from zero. We say, okay, we have no preconceptions about this world. We're starting from zero. Is there a problem with the microphone?
Yeah, apparently. I'm going to have a little look there. You carry on.
Yeah. The microphone is Yeti, is correct.
It is Yeti.
Okay, cool. Guys, let us know if it's actually if it's fine now. People say they can actually hear fine.
Oh, okay. You guys are having no problem then. Okay.
Yeah. So as I was saying, if you're doing for second world history, it's a bit more difficult because you literally start from zero. You have to start actually how did culture and civilization started and how does it come to be here. A good example for that would have been settings like Bioshock, for example, which has a completely different trajectory, or in many ways things like Star Wars. Star Wars can definitely be considered a Star Wars second world because it's in a place far away in a future that nobody knows about, kind of thing. But Star Wars kind of actually uses a little bit of a tricky thing that it says the assumption is that these are humans, so you kind of know what humans are about, kind of thing. So yeah, it's a shortcut kind of thing. As we said before, a setting is a direct derivative of its past. Begin by establishing the line of events that made the future divergent past and a reality. So this is important because, as you could see in places like Star Trek, which is a good example for science fiction, a lot of the history of the world is being discovered by the audience throughout the series. They don't give you they don't start by saying this was Earth, then people actually had massive wars, almost destroyed themselves, then they took their stuff together, then they discovered the warp drive, then people found them and decided to bring them to the stars and like that. They don't talk about that. They slowly show the threads that led to it. They refer to it, but that actually means that the person, Gene Roddenberry, for example, specifically, knew already what the history was. He wrote the history beforehand, so it was very easy for him to actually drop piece by piece the things that he wanted without info dumping you or doing a massive expo dump, but putting details into every single episode and putting details into the things, the way that people talked about things, the beliefs of the people. Like if you start from, for example, Star Trek Enterprise at the beginning of the whole thing, where they discuss even the Prime Directive, because it's not even the Prime Directive back then, you see how the world actually erupted into what we now consider essentially a utopian world for them. And at the end, known history is written by the victors, and that is an extremely important part, which I cannot be more emphasize enough. Factual history is the underlying base for your world building. So when you're writing the history of your world, you're not writing the history that people know, you're writing the history that actually happened. You can keep notes of how people interpret this history, but this is not the reality of the people of the world. For example, when you see the Matrix, you don't even know what is happening until very far later on. Essentially, you learn about the architect, because the history of the world that was written by essentially the creators of the Matrix knew what happened. They knew that the machines actually took over the world. They knew that people were put into the machines. They knew there was an architect. All of those things is the actual history, not the history the people of the world know. In science fiction, this is so important because Matrix is a very simplistic system. Like it talks about the very simple point: machines took over the world, humans are struggling as batteries, kind of thing.
Yeah, there's big pieces.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But when it comes to a place like, for example, The Expanse.
Was the example I was going to use.
Yes. It is extremely important because it changes the way that people understand the universe and changes what the narrative is. The utopian Earth from the perspective of the Martians, or the utopian Earth from the perspective of the people in the belt, is nothing like that, because the actual history is most of the people are living on the dough. Like they don't have money even to eat every day, and they have to rely on essentially the goodness of their overlords, kind of thing. So it's a completely different thing altogether.
Yeah, it's something that a lot of sci-fi settings, particularly people who are new to sci-fi, forget, because when they think of sci-fi, they think of the future, and then they forget that the history is what has created the current climate. So often that's where a lot of your prejudices and your drama and your conflict is going to come from. It's been set up over the course of decades to create the situation that you now find yourself in, which is probably full of conflict and ripe for a novel to be written in it.
Absolutely. Let's go to the next slide. Current affairs and conflicts. So this is where pretty much your story lies. Affected sectors, we'll talk about the sectors later on a bit, but the idea is underneath current affairs and conflicts is that everything that makes your world move is actually the relationships between people, organizations, and beliefs, and the interactions between them. In the beginning of a setting and during the creation of a setting, this is actually created as history, but what the effect of this history is to your setting comes to the current affairs and the conflicts of your current setting. The only exception to that rule will be inbound events and exploration and discovery, which are in many ways actually also inbound events. Inbound events are events that had nothing to do with the previous history of the world, but they come essentially as conflicts or essentially as kind of like thrust into the reality of the setting because something happened. The best example I can think of in the Independence Day.
Independence Day, yeah, absolutely.
Everything is normal until the alien starships come over the Earth and suddenly everything explodes in a completely different thing.
Yeah.
Mars attack, the same thing. We come in peace and then kill everybody kind of thing. Or everything else that has to do with science fiction. And science fiction is so much ingrained and so deeply affected by the idea of inbound events that is kind of like one of the cores of the theme of the setting.
It's
essentially
one of the big tropes.
Exactly.
Of the genre.
Something happened that nobody was expecting, or something happened that even was expected was not known to people, and that goes back to secret history. Like, for example, aliens are already here, the governments or secret organizations are known about, but now they are known to the world, and that is the beginning of our story because the players or the characters you have, actually they're not part of the secret organization, they're just parts of, you know, the common people that just learned about this thing.
Yeah.
Economy and sociology. So everything that happens to a world happens because of a reason. That can be either economic pushes or sociological pushes. That means that either the global thinking of people, not in the one-to-one relationship and not one like from one day to another, but through the years and through sociological evolution or through economy and financial evolution or essentially industrial evolution, we are actually moving towards a trajectory of either economic or political or ideological change. Okay, to give you an example, a good example for our world was the age of the 1700s and the revolutions era.
Yes.
Started with essentially the French Revolution and spread it throughout like essentially the United Kingdom and Poland and Greece and Haiti and the whole of South America and of course the United States of America, of course, right? So think about the fact that essentially the economy and the sociology of your setting will affect the way that the setting will be written. These are all forces that actually will change the way that the setting is affecting its characters and its locations and the beliefs of the people. Specifically, national and international politics, so what happens within the nations or the smaller units, and also what happens in the global sector. Religious beliefs and ideologies are extremely important because this is what the masses will be moving towards, right?
And I will say a lot of people think that religion has no place in sci-fi. That is not true. There are a lot of amazing sci-fi settings that have strong religious components, but also don't forget about ideologies like capitalism and communism and all sorts of other fascinating ideologies that move through people, that become part of the zeitgeist, that become controlling ideologies that are the weights on the scales of drama and change in a world. So don't just think religious beliefs, also think ideologies, and remember that both are incredibly powerful.
Just a small interjection here. Everything we talked about are kind of like the titles of the paragraphs that you need to write.
Absolutely.
Just to clarify here. So Ask your question, for example, what are the national and international politics currently in the world, how they're affecting daily life. Social stratification and mobility is an extremely important one. Essentially, it has to do with how is the society that you're currently investigating and preparing for is stratified, if it is stratified, and if it is stratified, is there mobility between that? Like, are people effectively the downtrodden that they never going to have a chance in hell to actually ever become anything else? And then the super rich that live in the massive golden towers or the flying towers over the city that you literally are out of reach because you can literally not fly there, kind of thing.
Elysium is a great example.
Elysium is a great example of that, but also altered carbon is a good example of that kind of thing, because, and also religious, like essentially in altered carbon, we see a humanity that found a way to extend life by effectively exchanging bodies, but there are people who have religiously decided not to take part in the practice and therefore die when they die. This is an incredibly
it's a massive split
exactly in population, exactly. Personal economic power. This has to do actually with how much things I can do with the things I have in front of me. And that is extremely important, especially when it comes to setting like cyberpunk. Because in cyberpunk, for example, we have a community of people that they might have economic power, but this economic power is actually probably being used in a different way than we are actually understanding right now. For example, in a cyberpunk city, like the latest cyberpunk game, you might live in a horrible apartment in a massive building that actually is very badly designed and very badly maintained, and people are kind of like live in a mesh of things. High-tech, low life. But you have a very cool bike or cool sneakers, whatever this may be, because this is how the personal economic power works, and that's how the accumulation of wealth works and the show of wealth works.
Which is actually a reflection of how low the character agency is within something like cyberpunk.
Absolutely.
You can change your personal space, but you can't change your apartment block, for example, for the better. You don't have that character agency.
And finally, the rule of law. I cannot stress enough how important that is, because at the end of the day, when you have an organized society, this society lives and dies based on the rules they have set. Yeah. Freedom of movement, freedom of expression, validation and protection of rights are things that will actually change the way you understand the world around you. If people, for example, have to carry always papers, or they have a chipset on their head or on their hand, or there are cameras who take continuous photos of them and they know always where they are, that changes a lot how oppressive the system is or not. The freedom of expression. Can you say what you want to say? Is there a chance that somebody will just grab and bug you essentially? You'll never see the light of day for the next day, and you might actually end up very happy at the end of the day, but not remembering anything that happened the last 24 hours kind of thing.
Great example of freedom of expression. If anybody has seen the Orville recently,
yes,
the social media episode.
Yes.
It's a very interesting take
extremely
on
powerful.
Freedom of expression.
And of course, I will not talk about Orwellian works, of course, and
1984 and all of that.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And of course, validation and protection of rights, which is also very important. Like, okay, we have the laws. Are these carried by a legislative and an executive branch which are corrupt or not corrupt? And is the structure of the world as it stands right now able to sustain its laws? A good example for that would be Judge Dredd as a setting. A setting that things went so bad that the common policeman becomes literally judge, jury, and executioner, which actually means they have all the powers merged to them, because there was no other way. Due process could not have been done any other way, because the system was overwhelmed to the point actually does not make any sense to actually separate them anymore. This will change the way the setting works, and that actually is not just for high science fiction. It's for any setting, including fantasy or modern day, but definitely science fiction is very important, because science fiction adds those little details that make it a little bit more harder. Like everything we create in a science fiction world when it comes to technology, and we'll talk about it in a bit, can be used for good or evil. We know that. But imagine how much evil you can do with the same tools you can actually do good, and how the rules and laws change the way they're applied. Biology and divergent evolution. So this is actually something, of course, that is very important to biopunk or any setting that talks about speciation, like aliens or evolved species, or alternative evolution, like, for example, inhumans, superhumans, mutants. All of those fall under this umbrella, okay? But at the end of the day, the question is health and access to health. How is the health of the world in general? Like, is health an immortality and thing? If immortality is a thing, is it accessible to everyone? How do we handle the socioeconomic change that brings to the world? Essentially, if somebody lives forever, do they work forever? Are they going to a retirement that might last for 900 years? Is it too expensive to do it? Is it expensive so only the rich and stratified higher can actually do it? What kind of imbalance does it bring to the world? How does it work if somebody can live forever while everybody else doesn't? Are they gods? Does compound interest mean that these people are extremely wealthy to the point that, you know, then 0.01% has 99.99 of the wealth and everybody's a slave kind of thing? Like, there are so many fundamental changes that the very idea of access to extreme health has that will fundamentally change your setting. Always think about it, even if it's not about biopunk, but it's about actually what it does. Like, is, for example, custom-made babies a thing in your world?
Gattaca.
Gattaca is a great example of that, actually. How Gattaca kind of like focused on the idea of like, how does this affect your prospects in life? Absolutely. What does this mean for you? And how does it affect crime and law and everything around it?
This is something they touched on in Deep Space Nine as well. I'm sorry, I'm a massive Star Trek fan, naturally. Yes. But the other thing to think about biology, of course, Dimitris hasn't added it here, but if you have aliens in your world, then xenobiology is a real thing that becomes absolutely fascinating. How does that work with our biology? Are the two mutually exclusive? Are they compatible? You know, what are the environments and ecologies that your main characters are exploring?
But even more so, like, people, Europeans, when they came to South America, they decimated, I mean, North America as well, they decimated the population just by the fact they were there.
Yeah. Yeah. So diseases that they carry that are nothing to them. This is something that was explored in S.H.I.E.L.D. early on. Yes. It was very, very interesting.
Exactly. And essentially that's going to be very important for any exploration, especially interstellar exploration. Like, how important that is. Like, the idea that you go to another planet, you just remove your helmet, even if the atmosphere is oxygenated, is the equivalent of actually murder or assassination, or, you know. Yeah.
That's what makes us shout at the TV.
Exactly.
In case you're curious.
Yes, exactly. So again, in biology divergent evolution, sentience and sapience, and like the difference between those and how does it affect your setting? Natural and accelerated evolution. We're already experiencing accelerated evolution in humanity, and definitely the changes between natural, biological, and artificial. There is a big gap that needs to be questioned and answered here. Do we push, or does your civilization push the evolution forward by using biological means, for example, CRISPR or anything like that? Or do they use things like, for example, bionic implements and augmented cybernetics, for example? Because this changes the idea. You are still evolved, you just evolved in a different way. And how far have you gone there?
Which paths are open? And again, that will depend on your genre and the tone that you're looking for. Do you want it to be gritty and that, like, yes, you can extend your life, but it's pain, which is very cyberpunk? Or do you want it to be more utopian, like death is no longer the obstacle that it once was?
Absolutely. And then finally, environment and ecology, that Janet actually kind of touched on. But the question is, how do the different environments in your setting affect the people? Like, I cannot think of a worst movie ever, apart from the movie called Signs. I don't know if you've seen it. I hope you haven't. I will spoil it for you because we're way past the
international spoiler
deadline. But essentially, aliens come to Earth to take over Earth, a planet which is 70% water, and when it rains, they have to run for cover because they have not thought about rain. And I'm like,
yeah, those aliens deserve to die.
Exactly. I don't care how much intelligence technology you had to actually travel here. If you have done this, you deserve to die. As simple as that. Congratulations.
Okay.
Anyway, let's go back to our topic here and talk about prevalent powers. The groups of people that bring change and give motion to your world. It's true. And to quote our amazing science fiction author, a truth universally understood that change can only be brought if many people come together to make a difference. This occurs in general via organizations, and by organizations, I don't mean, I don't know, Voltec or Megacorp X or whatever this might be. I talk about anything that has to do with more than one person working with others towards a common goal. That can be a religion, it can be a rebellious faction, it can be guerrillas, it can be a megacorp, it can be a nation of people, it can be a roving band or a galactic empire. All of those organizations, and in general, they use either in macro or micro exactly the same rules to work. They always have a source of power. Something within that, if this organization is established, gives them power. That can be financial power, it can be influence, it can be like psychological influence to people, it can be a historical precedence. Like a good example would be kingdoms and kings. Power from God. That's how you establish, right? Essentially, you are ordained by God to be leading this country. Or, for example, religions, as we said, that probably go for God essentially as well, or gods or whatever this might be. But there are also organizations that actually believe, for example, in a belief. Like, for example, the French Revolution was all about, for example, liberty and equality, right? In the United States, the emancipation, for example, of the slaves had to do actually with freedom kind of thing. Like these self-organized or hardly organized units of people is what brings change. Core values. Every organization, regardless of what they are, should have a list of values that they will be handling based on those, their dealings with others and internally. So do we treat others with disdain while we're actually friendly only with our own? Do we respect others? Do we actually believe that we are above everybody else and everybody else should be essentially be under our foot? All of those values are those that will actually lead you as the creator of the setting know how would you have reacted. For example, if you say 100 years ago, a corporation called Iron Thrust Dynamics created the first ion drive. But these people, for example, will only believe that power should only be given to those that deserve it. Or that essentially the only true way to essentially attain stronghold is military strength. How would that affect the story of this the history of this corporation? Will they give the power to everybody apart from military powers? And which military powers? Is it going to be nationalistic, or is it actually completely and utterly a matter of how much money you can actually give us and who are you? Exactly. Then branding. The difference between core values and branding is actually not what they are, but what they say they are. Every organization, regardless of what they are, again, has two phases. The in phase that knows what is actually happening, and the phase that they present to the world. And that's very important because that will also affect the way that your story is written, because this is the story of the victors, right? When a nation conquers another nation, they don't say, we were the conquerors that killed effectively 5,000 people, 500 million people, and then took over. They say, we came here to effectively free the oppressed. That's the branding. Yeah. We are the freedom fighters, not the killers. Internally, they might say we just want more money, because that's what actually motivates us. And finally, controlling interests. Extremely important as well. Okay, many people, one organization, but who's managing those people?
Who's sitting at the shadowy table?
Who's sitting at the table? Shadowy or not, but who is sitting on the table? Because the beliefs, politics, sociological standing, and religious ideologies and philosophies of those people will affect the organization and its story. It's very common to see, for example, an organization changing a CEO and changing completely the way they actually do business. Or the fact that the whole organization, like, for example, don't know, like Tesla, being defined by the actions of their leaders. Relationships with the rest of socio-political and financial fabric of the world. And this is kind of like everything we talk together. How does it actually affect everybody else? Because in your world, you won't have one organization. Even if you're an empire, you have your local dukes and your local lords, and everybody wants something different and have a slightly different way of taking it. So the question is, how does your organization affect others and how is it affected by other people in the world, and which are the events that are more relevant to this organization. Again, all of these things can be written in a maximum of 2 small paragraphs and 5 points.
Yeah.
So do not go very far than that. Just to be clear, an organization cannot be more than 3 paragraphs in writing,
Yeah.
whatever this might
So
be.
as an example, when I made my cyberpunk setting, I created several mega corporations because it's one of the things that makes cyberpunk feel like cyberpunk. And basically what I wrote down is, what's the outside face? What's the inside face? What do these people want? What are their core values? So you can, again, you can go through source of power, you can choose that, but all you need to start with is a couple of bullet points. And once you start working with them, you'll naturally figure out which ones are interesting for your story, and which ones you might want to write a few more bullet points on. Not loads and loads of paragraphs.
Yes.
Just a few more bullet points, just develop a little bit more.
And of course, as we discussed before, there is nothing more important than the people, because history is attributed to nations, but it's the people that shape it. For example, since we talked about the United States in the chat, people like Washington, people like Bolivar, Napoleon. These are names that if I actually note them, you know who they are and you understand what was the effect they had in history, because there were people who were leaders of people. And these are the people who will be changing the history of the world. I mean, I'm talking about, for example, people like, Jesus Christ, for example, Julius Caesar, Aristotle, kind of thing, Alexander the Great. All of those people are people who represent an organization or an organization they built or they inherited, and their personal actions changed the way that the world works. A good example for that, for example, in terms of the science fiction settings we're talking about, would have been Epstein in The Expanse.
Yeah.
The whole idea of the history of Epstein, who was the person who created the Epstein drive, is what changed the history of the world, and his beliefs and philosophies and the way that he thought of the world and his personal sacrifices, what actually make the world the thing that it is today. So the question here for each of the people is, what is the influence they had in the world, or they have in the world? What is the reputation they have? Because reputation and influence are 2 different things. Somebody must be very powerful, but can actually be of ill repute, and also the reputation he might change. Bolivar, for example, it happens actually, I'm watching a new podcast right now, started to be the liberator of South America and ended up becoming a dictator because he didn't change, the way that people see him did.
Yeah.
Agenda. What do they want to achieve? Because if a person wants to achieve something specific and they have the reasons to achieve it, will morph and shape their history and the history of anybody they will be affecting. And finally, what is their personal ethos? Personal ethos is not about what they want to achieve, but what are the lines they will cross and the things they will not touch during their journey. Do they believe in murder? Do they believe, for example, that the betterment of the many actually means the sacrifice of one, and that's perfectly fine for them, for example? Do they believe that rule of law is more important than personal will, for example? All of those questions will affect the history that they will shape. These people become important because they're kind of like the cornerstones of your civilization. As humans, we are more easily affected and more easily connected to other humans than organizations.
Yeah.
And that is why they're important to be in your history and to take an important role in your history when you are shaping it, and also for the people who are currently in the world, like the presidents of your world or whatever this might be.
I will also add to people
Yeah.
that as writers, which we are, people are show don't tell. People can embody so many different things, and they don't even need to be on stage to embody those things. We know Darth Vader is terrifying long before we meet him, right? In Star Wars, we know that there's a terrifying organization from the way they look. But what we really know is the uniforms that they wear, the representative of that organization that you meet, the head of that organization who typifies who they are. People are absolutely wonderful for show don't tell, and powerful people, and who your societies lift up as powerful people, it's very telling about the people and the societies. So that's always something to bear in mind when you're world building. People are a great vehicle for conveying those ideas.
One second before we continue, a small note here. Janet said something interesting because she talked actually about what the organization wears, like the uniforms,
for example.
This is a good example of what you could only be writing if the organization becomes important. You might write about 10 organizations and never talk about their uniforms, but the moment that one of your heroes have to interact with them, for example, he has to fight the goons of the organization, or he is a member of organization, then the uniforms become important. This is the point that you go back to the article you've written about your organization and you create a new subcategory that says uniforms, only black with gold stripes. They use red to accent things, and they always wear boots, period. That's actually another note that added because you suddenly have more things to talk about the organization. It becomes more important to your story. Now, let's go to technology engineering. This is actually a two slides part because it's quite important to understand. It's science fiction. Availability. What technology is there and who is it available to? Because technology existing does not mean that people have access to it. Like, you might have cloaking technology, but only the Klingons have it. And also from Klingons, only 5 of them know how to make it. That is very important on your setting kind of thing. Or for example, both of your Romulans and Klingons have cloaking, but Romulan actually is cloaking while Klingons are kind of like shady, kind of like cloaking, not really. This is important because when you're especially creating locations which are further apart, like for example, different intergalactic empires and things like that, technology and technological differentiation and the kind of the technology trees that bring to there will bring significant changes. For example, your humans might have found the secrets of antimatter, and they have antimatter weapons and antimatter power generators, while another, like space elves, they might have actually have managed to harness the power of love.
Or quantum entanglement or
yes,
something.
It was a joke, but yes. For example, it can be, for example, as you said, quantum entanglement, or for example, it can be, for example, fusion power, or for example, matter conversion, or dark power, dark force, whatever this might be. Trajectory. Where does the technology go? Like, do we live in a world that technology still grows, and do new discoveries happen every day, or is it a world that essentially it starts to forget, or it stopped actually having any more a high trajectory, or it actually kind of like plateaued? And this can happen because of sociological changes. It might happen because effectively, who cares about science if everybody's happy? Or for example, we're at war and suddenly we have massive, great leaps in technology kind of thing. Key technology and their impact on daily life, military, and industry. These are also 3 different ways of actually seeing availability as well, but they also have to do with why technology is being used. In daily life, it's about convenience. It's about how can I make my everyday life easier and simpler and cleaner and more good for me as a person who does not care anything about my personal life or my friends. Military, of course, you understand this is about killing people or exerting control over people, while industry is about how can I make more money with this technology than I was making yesterday. These are very different things, and they will find the same technologies having completely different implementations. And on the verge of a breakthrough, discovery and exploration, again, extremely important for science fiction, as we said before, because it's all about actually this new horizon around the corner. And tangibles and intangibles are 2 different things which are very important to understand the difference of. A tangible discovery exploration can be, for example, the discovery of a new planet, or the technological advancement to the point that we have miniaturized computers so much that can now be in your brain, nanocomputers, for example. While intangibles might be sociological change. The fact that essentially after hundreds of years of conflict, people understood that, you know what, this war thing doesn't work between humans. We have to create a society that everybody is actually in accordance to. Sociological change is also technological change in many ways, because it's powered and changed from that. Like a virtual democracy as a utopian idea, for example, will be an intangible technological advancement for a civilization. Then we have technological adaptation, evolution, and opposition. Every time that something new comes into play, that's not mean that everybody's like, hey, that's amazing, let's everybody use this thing now. When the train came in the UK for the first time in Britain, they had to build worlds around the train so people cannot see how fast the train was going because we're petrified of the train. When potatoes came to Greece, people were so terrified of potatoes because they thought actually they were completely alien and weird that they had to make them feel that they're super important and put guards around them so people start using them. Because people don't always accept things on face value, and it takes time for something to adapt. For a solution to adapt to something.
Yeah, there's a social adoption period,
Exactly.
essentially. And that's different, will be different in different places, and that'll be different in different realms, like industry versus military versus social,
Absolutely.
everyday.
And of course, evolution. When something is discovered, in most cases, does not actually is able to stay the same the moment it comes with it touches anybody around it. The moment that something becomes available, it will start to mutate. The uses that you're going to be finding for it will be completely different than the ones you imagine. Trust me, I created called Anvil, and people have used it for all sorts of crazy things I never thought possible. And of course, opposition. Some of the people will never actually adopt it. In fact, they will become completely against it and will actually try to work against it and stop it from happening. Like, for example, imagine a time in Gattaca, people would have been very angry at some point with the idea of actually having designer babies, especially not if anybody have access to it, kind of thing. Communication, an extremely important question. I will have to say one thing about empires rise and fall into their ability to communicate messages from one place to another quickly compared to the ability of them having to mobilize. That is the reason that most, at least according to sociology, most empires crumbled during the 1700s because simply enough, if somebody is about 3 months away from you, you cannot really exert any actual power to them.
I was going to say communications, logistics, and transportation are what defines what you can control.
Yes. But
in a nutshell.
Yeah, but also it defines a lot more things. Like, for example, if traveling from one station to another takes years, that's one thing. If your FTL, faster than light, is relativistic, that might mean that you have been traveling for a year, but 100 years have passed during the time you've been traveling. Can you imagine how extremely different the world will be the moment you arrive there, and not to mention coming back? Like 3 generations of your family would have died by the time you're back. And all of the things that we talked about, from people, organizations, technology, sociology, engineering, come down to that. As Janet calls it, the ultimate show, don't tell. Art, architecture, fashion, and design is how all of those things we talked about are actually shown in your novels, in your world, or whatever this might be. The effect of technology and on technology of art and design and architecture. The type of buildings, how they are standing, how they're designed, why they're designed the way they are, have to do with technology. They also have with engineering. So what can we create? Essentially, okay, it's amazing to say let's create a space elevator, but if the engineering is not there to be able to do it, it will never happen. Now, everything we talked about will actually affect each other, but the point is, the way it looks like has to do with how people and social strata took this information and made something out of it. And that's where art and fashion comes into it. And of course, social consciousness and ethics, I think that is very simple to describe from everything. Fashion changes people, and people change fashion effectively. And fashion is not just about clothing. I'm talking about the beliefs we have. We're talking about the way we conduct ourselves in daily life. Like essentially the idea that you go from 9 to 5 to work is a fashion when it comes sociologically, okay? Because it was not the case for a long time. And for many societies that were not actually affected by the Western civilization, it was never a thing. So in many ways, that is also a trend.
But I would also say art, architecture, fashion, and design, and music, and everything else in that space is how people have absorbed the present and represent the present, but it's also how people have absorbed the present and represent their hopes for the future.
Absolutely.
That is the place of this. So it's that like intangible spirit of where people think they are going.
And where they are.
And where they are. So it's so powerful if an author can use this correctly. It gives you so much. You can leverage it so well. And it's something that people really forget about, especially in sci-fi. They spend all their time talking about tech and they forget to talk about the intangible, the space of the people and the space that people think they are going to, which tells you so much about the world and gives your reader so much real human experience, even if the humans we're talking about aren't humans.
To wrap it all together, it is intricately connected system of simple nodes. Like your world is essentially simple nodes, like an organization, a person, a technology, whatever this might be, that they are that the complexity between them arises from the interactions between the nodes that generate events. So for example, if two nodes, let's say two organizations, find themselves to the opposite side of history because of politics or beliefs or whatever this might be, or desires, these two events will generate an event. That can be a conflict, it can be anything that can be. Technology is extremely important, but it's the people and the organizations they work or lead that define how it's used and the effect it will have. In other words, yes, technology is what makes science fiction in many ways, but it's not technology that makes the things work. It's the people and the things that they represent that makes things work, and they decide how this is going to work. Nuclear power could have been a force for good and a force for evil. Hiroshima and Nagasaki was one side, amazing power, and the modern civilization is the other. When we're building, write about only the important things and write short, clean paragraphs. Only expand if the topic is important to your story. We touched that already. We talked about actually how you actually expand it. You start with a very small piece, then you expand it only when it's needed to be expanded. Make sure your work is easily searchable. If it is not, it might well not exist, because as your world building will grow, so will that document. And if that document is no longer searchable, you will never find it. You will make double copies, triple copies of the same thing, and then there will not be any single source of truth, which actually means you're not world building anymore. You're just actually, flying high from your seat of your pants. Exactly. Use tags, clear naming, and good organization folder system. No matter what you're using, it doesn't really matter. Next steps, as always, grab your hammer and go world build, that's what we say here. Thank you so very much for listening. We'll answer any questions right now if we have any time. I'm really sorry I ran a bit late. Join us tomorrow, by the way. It's tomorrow, right? Tomorrow for the tour, and we'll answer any questions you might have actually about Gold Anvil. And also, if we have not given it already, Haley, Sci-Fi Writer, if you go to Gold Anvil, it's going to give you 50% off any annual membership, right, guys, if you need anything.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. We just have one question, and then we have to jump off so we can get to our networking event. But Joyita, and apologies if I mispronounced your name, says people are show, not tell, and powerful people are often very telling about people in society, and they find this quite challenging. I keep writing too many characters that feel very different from each other, and it just results in a confusing world that lacks consistency because the prevalent people are so different. Do you have any tricks to manage this?
Use the meta.
So use the meta is a good answer, but I will also say people are complicated and will always be complicated because we are people, but people don't remember the complications. People really remember only the effects of your actions and the way that they were actually advertised to you. So a complicated character, like a big leader of a cult or anything like that, will not be remembered for everything they have done. They remembered for the fact that they have at some point made a terrible mistake and killed somebody, and the fact that they actually brought social change about this thing. And that's how they're remembered. So get your characters, make them complex, and then kill your darlings and know your ideas in world building, and find out what are the 2 or 3 things that define them, and you'll get actually kind of like, the essence, essentially, exactly, of that character.
Yeah, that's so helpful. Thank you so much. So many people have been like, oh, this has been so great. This is what I needed to learn about world building. So thank you both so much.
Just based
again,
on Haley, just based it on the chat,
No?
actually a Dropbox link for the presentation. Of course, I will give it to you as well, but if guys need it right now, they have the presentation there.
Awesome. Thank you. Yes. And worldanvil.com, and the code was that sci-fi writer? Was that what the
Sci-Fi
code
Writer
was?
is the code.
Sci-Fi Writer.
And that's 50% off any annual membership. But World
Perfect,
Anvil
yeah.
is also for free, so you can just go and create a free account and try it out. And if you like it, you can get a membership. And if you don't like it, or you just want the free bit, then that's also okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just come join the community and say hello, basically.
Yes, exactly. And if you're not sure how to use World Anvil, come back tomorrow. We will have both of them back again to talk all about how to use World Anvil, which is just going to be so much fun. So thank you all so much. We are going to push the networking session back just 15 minutes so that we all have time to, drink and eat and walk for a bit. No worries. And that will start again in 15 minutes. Janet and Demetrius, thank you so much. And we will see you tomorrow. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.